Nothing sells freedom like tyranny. And the tyranny leveled against Americans over the last 2 years has awakened millions who didn't think it could happen here. It's now obvious. America is not immune to despotism. But now what? What do we do with all this excitement people have for liberty? We're discussing how to turn millions of Americans' passion for freedom into an unstoppable movement that will last. I'm Paul Dragoo, and this is Freedom is the Cure. In 1958, retired businessman Robert Welch created the John Birch Society to stop the oncoming tyranny being coordinated by a small and powerful group of people aiming to subjugate the world. For more than 60 years, the JBS warned that this group of insiders was subversively working to make Americans more dependent, dumber, weaker, poorer, and far less free. And while policy after policy and one cultural agenda after another were being implemented toward these goals, many still refused to see what was really happening. Then COVID mania exploded and has awakened an unprecedented number of Americans and people all over the world, for that matter. The aspiring international totalitarians are using COVID-19 as an excuse to trigger a reset, to plunge us into a world in which you will own nothing and them everything, including you. They don't even try to hide it anymore. Today I'm talking to three people who spend their time organizing the JBS Exploding Grassroots campaign, designed to stop the greatest threat to humanity. They've been incredibly busy as people all over the world and the country are rising from their slumber and looking to defend our way of life. Wayne Morrow is the JBS National Field Coordinator and Vice President. Dave Giordano is a field coordinator for states in the Northeast, and Arthur Hampton is a coordinator for states in the South. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining me. The first question I have is, how serious is this threat to our way of life? Wayne, we've spoken about this quite a bit, and you're pretty good at this. So let's start with you.
Sure. Well, yeah, it is. Well, now it's very apparent. It used to be sort of subtle, hidden, and now we're seeing the things we've talked about throughout the years now are showing up. We see that the Bill of Rights are being abused, our Constitution is ignored by legislators, and people know something's radically wrong. And it's an opportunity for us to give them the answers. What's wrong? What's really happening? It's not by mistake. And they're using COVID-19 as a vehicle for tyranny and with fear. So they know it works, and it gives us a chance now to explain what's really going on.
What's really going on, Dave, Arthur? What do we tell folks? Because everyone are they curious?
I think what's happening is people are starting to ask questions when, for example, the president says we need to protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated, and someone scratches there and says, why are we protecting the vaccinated if they're vaccinated? People are also asking questions because they're seeing things. Wait a minute, the government's keeping us safer by laying off 20% of all law enforcement when crime is going up. Mm-hmm. They're keeping us safer by laying off 20% of all healthcare workers. Right. That's keeping us safer. They're keeping us safer by letting go of 20% of the military, and that's going to keep us safer. So it's really causing them to ask a lot of questions right now.
And a lot of times what happens is you see the symptoms of the problem, and whether it's CRT in the schools or the COVID mandates, all you're seeing is the symptoms of a much bigger issue, and we're here to stop the bigger issue.
Let's talk about the bigger issue.
Yeah.
Wayne.
Tyranny. It's what we see. It's all part of the plan, right? But they use fear as their tool. And but people are fearful, and we try to take the fear and give them an education of really what's happening. So that opens a door for us, and they want to hear really what this is truly all about. It's been going on for a long time, and as we study the conspiracy, what it is, we know near the end they would be exposing themselves to their plan. And fortunately, there are people who really want to act on it, and there's some are sheep who just want to go along. But we are fortunate to find people who really want to do something about it. That's what's going on.
Are you guys finding that people are more open to the idea of the conspiracy, this global network working to enslave us all? Has COVID changed people's receptiveness to that?
Well, I can tell you this. We see this tyranny happening worldwide. It's not just the United States now.
Right.
And I think that's the tip-off. It's riots in the streets of, Germany or in Austria, England. So it's all throughout the United States. It's all throughout the world now. So it's not just the United States. It's a global conspiracy. And
Right.
now even people from other countries see this, and they're putting it together because tyranny is abound now all over. And they're using COVID-19, and they've talked about that, using some bioweapon to cause this to happen. So that's what we see. It opens the door for a lot of conversations. That's what I see.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is it's reaching their doorstep. It's one thing to read these stories, but now millions of Americans are losing their jobs because of a mandate. So they're open, their mind is open to things like conspiracy. They're also either experiencing or know someone who's having an adverse effect or worse. And, I was saying to people, there was a time where there was 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, I'll use that, where I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who had an adverse effect.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know about you, but myself, I'm hearing of a friend who knows somebody who had an adverse effect or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or it's happened within their family. So it's completely opened their mind, it's reached their doorstep, and now they're more open to listening.
Yeah.
Has recruiting become easier in this COVID hysteria age?
Absolutely. Over the last year or so since the pandemic, or plandemic, we've recruited more people than ever before. People are waking up, but what we need to do is that whether coming to us with issues, vaccine mandates, my wife is going to have to quit her job because of it. They're teaching CRT in the classrooms, and we didn't know that until they started going to school at home. So yes, people are waking up, but like I said earlier, this is just the root this is the branch or symptoms of a much bigger problem, a much bigger conspiracy that is attacking every area of our lives. And what we have to do is say, yes, we're going to deal with this issue. Yes, we're going to deal with this branch issue. But we need to attack the deep state because they're coming for every aspect of your life. They want to enslave you, and they want you to be a mindless drone. And the people that are refusing the mandates they're bucking the system, and they're not playing the game. And I think that's one thing that separates the John Birch Society from other organizations that may be against CRT or against abortion. Yes, we deal with those things, but there's a much bigger issue that we need to attack at the root, because if you cut the root of the tree's going to come down and all the branches with it.
Right. Dave, how long have you been a coordinator?
I just started as the coordinator, but a longtime member of the John Birch Society for 27 years and got thrown right in as a chapter leader and then been a section leader for about 15 years. So I've committed myself full-time now to the organization.
Well, I was going to ask you and Wayne, who've been around for a while, is there a huge difference now to the reception to the John Birch Society message as opposed to years? I mentioned in my intro, and I think it's safe to say that there was a lot of scoffing. This was a message that labeled us kooks and wackos for a long, long time. What is the difference now, as someone who's been in the JBS for so long, in how people perceive the John Birch Society now versus perhaps 20 years ago or even 30 years ago?
Well, history has proven us right. We've been talking about it for a long time, over 60 years. And now you go through the trail of history, and the things we talked about 30, 40 years ago are happening now. So we say, this is their plan, this is what they do. So time in history is revealing what we said. We were prophetic? I don't know. We certainly written about things about in the past that talks about from other authors along the time that said, this will happen. And it's happening now. So once we expose our history, our story is very believable. That's what I see.
Yeah, and Robert Welch, I don't know if it's to paraphrase him, he said, you know, in the end, they will come out from undercover, and everybody will see them. That's when they're most vulnerable. And I got to tell you, as long as I've been a member, I thought that would happen just past my lifetime. And then quite a few years ago, I said, I think it might happen during my lifetime. And then in 2016, 2000, the virus, I said, it's here. They're out from undercover, which I think makes people, everyone else is starting to see that now, because they are out from undercover, and they're more open to our message right now.
Okay. You had started talking about why you're part of the JBS, or what makes us unique. Do you guys want to add anything to that? There are lots of groups, and I want to follow up after this with all these groups popping up. There's a lot of fervency going on. But what makes the JBS different from a lot of the groups out there? Wayne, you can start.
That was me. Okay, well, yeah, what happens, I run into them all the time. They form these groups. The question they may ask, or the comment back to them, we didn't know you existed. But they use our material. But you've got a combination of ignorance. People want to be the tip of the spear, but they don't have the history of the national organization behind it. And unfortunately, what happens, they get together for a short period of time, and they stop, they flame out, and they go away. They are the freedom movement. And you try to reach those people and explain to them, hey, listen, I know you want to do something. It's a holdover from the Trump era. And so we're going to give you real action tools that make a difference. And so, as I think Arthur was saying, is that, you know, they're up in the branches on a particular item. Could be COVID-19, Second Amendment. CRT. But the root of the problem, CRT, but the root of the problem is a satanic conspiracy. That's what's holding the tree up. And we identify the basic cause of everything. It's not a symptom, it's the cause. And I think that's what when you explain that to them, they say, I get it now. So don't get caught up in one particular symptom. It's a much bigger picture. And some people have a hard time grasping that. They think if I just solve this, COVID-19, we're good. The answer is no. They'll use another weapon, but they come at us 10 different ways. That makes the Birch Society unique, because we have 8 or 9 different approaches to all the problems they give us.
We try to go to the root.
Yeah, not the symptoms. But the symptoms point to really what the cause is. That's what I see.
I would say that the number one thing, the difference between the Birch Society that I learned from the beginning, is conspiracy. We identify Robert Welch said you can't beat the conspiracy if you don't know about the conspiracy. What's the number one job of a conspiracy? To convince you that there's not a conspiracy.
That it doesn't exist.
So it doesn't exist. Right. So I think that's the biggest thing with the John Birch Society. But also the history of the John Birch Society, the years. You don't know how many times we've gone into other groups, whether the times of the Tea Party, Ron Paul Revolution, all these well-intentioned people, and some of them have joined us, and they've read our material, and as they read it, they went, wow, you were way ahead of this a long time ago. So that, and then the action items that we have, the tools that we have. And people ask, well, what have you guys done? And well, other than we stopped the takeover of the Western Hemisphere, it was called the FTAA, the Free Trade Area of the Americas, and most people didn't even know what that was, but yet the John Birch Society stopped it.
Yeah. What else have we done? Where do we begin with this?
Well, a specific time, me and another coordinator, this was before I was a coordinator, we went to a Convention of States rally. This was this past summer, so it's relatively recent, and one of my representatives was there, and he was promoting the Convention of States, or Article 5 Convention.
All right.
And I simply asked the question, you know, they're not following the Constitution now. I mean, our First Amendment rights are being infringed upon. Second Amendment rights, our rights to bear arms, our right to privacy, the Fourth Amendment, the states' rights, the 10th Amendment, they're all being encroached upon. And if they're not following the Constitution now, what makes you think that they would follow it after you change it? And then open it up for it to be changed to whatever, to lose all those rights. And we were there, and we had a long conversation with my representative, and we changed his mind. He said, you make a very compelling argument. So we are there, behind the scenes, talking to our representatives, influencing them and changing their minds for the better to get back to the Constitution.
Dovetailing on what Arthur said about the Convention of the States, again, about the history, because I just gave a presentation on Convention of the States to a group, and I showed this is a new idea, this wonderful new idea, the Convention of the States. Really, well, in 1995 it was called the Conference of the States. And then I show the new American magazine of when we stopped the Conference of the States. It's just a repackaged idea. And that's when people's eyes just went, wow, you're way ahead, and they listen. While I was giving the presentation, a gentleman was walking to the front of the room. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but he walked up to the table, and I just stopped for a second and said, "Were you looking for something?" And I gave him one of the reprints. As he went back to the room after the meeting, I asked one of the other people, who was that gentleman? He said, oh, he was all for this. And while he was listening to you, he said, this is all wrong. I was fooled.
Well, we had a pretty busy year last year with, speaking of Convention of States. We bounced around quite a bit, and I think it was a pretty good year, right, Wayne, as far as putting that agenda, really obstructing it. But I think this is a really good example of one of those issues that conservatives may not be as aware of, but it's one of those things that really goes to the root of how they're trying to overhaul and upturn our society in America as a whole.
Right, and they try lots of different things. We talked about things in the past when we started supporting local police in the early 60s. And we know that's one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto is nationalize the police force. We have that program ongoing for a while, and they're trying to defund the police and say this is a reason for it, right? So that's a milestone. Also, we exposed the UN, really what their agenda really was, world government. And as we go through time, a bunch of communist dictators there. And so we're seeing, now we're talking through this and explain really what it is we've been talking about since the early 60s. And we go through the course of time, as we wrote about it and talked about it, and we discuss it openly, some scoffed on us, but history's proven us out correctly, because they were just saying is that they feel they have nothing to fear now because they think the momentum is their way, and they don't realize is that it's waking up a lot of people. And so they have to play the fear game, and I think they're panicking because there are lots of people waking up.
Yes. And
we see that. And even the small groups that we talked about that form, that means people want to do something. We give them action tools to do that. Other than it's nice to be educated, but if you can't put it to action, you get frustrated. You gotta make it happen.
And that's kind of the crux of what we're discussing here is that there is a large awakening. You guys on the ground can attest to this most. And we've kind of touched on this idea, and me and you have talked about it. Yep. There's such a danger if we do not harness that energy correctly. If we somehow waste all that energy, let's elaborate on that. Maybe someone's listening, they have a local group or whatnot, or they're looking to get plugged in, and maybe they're not necessarily interested. Why is it so important to plug into, not that we're just tooting our own horn and we want to just market the JBS. We're really interested in obviously saving America and the world. And why, can you make a plea to listeners and viewers why it's so important that they get plugged in and they harness that energy correctly instead of forming another group that may not?
I'll just chime in. I want to see what Arthur and David have to say about. We have a new tool called Congressional Scorecard. We had that in the past, and it's the voting record of your U.S. senators or your congressmen. And people don't even know who the congressman is, let alone visit them. And it's a good way to expose really their report card, either good or bad, and hold them accountable, because our goal is to educate the electorate to have constitutional-minded representatives. Once you have that, which Congress makes laws, right? Then a lot of the problems we have, at least legally, is fine. The Constitution's fine. And so that's a real strong action tool, and as we roll it out to the communities, this is something they can physically do and talk to their elected officials, hey, why did you vote this way? And I tell you, people who have been elected in those offices now know that they've been revealed what's really happening. Either they change, they adapt, or they get taken out of office. That's what I see. It's one of the examples anyway.
Well, it's also a good way to hold our elected officials' feet to the fire It's here it is. You did. There's a big check mark. You did well here. You voted for the Constitution here. Here's a big X. No, you didn't do that. And it's got their number on there. It's got their website on there.
Right.
And when we equip our members with this tool that we have, it becomes so much more powerful. And they can tell their friends, hey, here's the number right there. Here's what he did. Here's the part of the Constitution where it's unconstitutional. We need to get together and call him and say, hey, I'm not going to vote for you again if you keep voting like this. Your record's a 0. And these people that are in, they're politicians, and they have an ego the size of this building. The only thing that really keeps them accountable is re-election. That's why term limits don't work. And
Threaten their power.
Absolutely. You know, if you know you're not going to get elected the next term around because you're at the end, you're going to vote however you want to vote, whichever way you want to vote. And so saying, hey, you know, if you keep this kind of record up, I'm not going to vote for you again. I'm going to tell all my friends to do the same thing. And if enough people call and let them know, they'll straighten up, or we'll get somebody else to represent us.
How do people react when you tell them about we're probably one of the few organizations that does have something like the Congressman Scorecard, you know, along with its cousin, the Freedom Index.
Yeah, I call it the Truth Theorem because the congressman can't hide behind it. No. We take, I think on the scorecard it's 6. We used to do 8 on the Trim Bulletin, which was tax reform immediately, the predecessor. But the Congressional Scorecard takes 6. So you take 6 bills, find out how much spending is unconstitutional. Who cares about the D's and the R's? You either get a check or a minus, check or an X. And it doesn't matter. And it also helps teach even our own prospects and members, because there's a lot of conservative Republicans out there that are supporting these unconstitutional Republicans. And you hand them a Congressional Scorecard, and they're surprised to see that their Republican only got 1 check and the rest of them were all X's, the same as the Democrat. So one of the, even internally, one of the problems we have is to convince our own that this is not a battle between Republican and Democrat. This is a battle against the globalists versus Americanism.
Well, you touch on a topic that I think really illustrates why we are here in the first place, and that has been because we've been so partisan, right? We think, oh, they're Republican, and they'll be, you know, they'll do good, and then of course we have the Congressman Carr that kind of blasts that to pieces for a lot of part, for the most part, because there are just so many Republicans that don't. They're not constitutional. They vote to what? To lots of spending, you know, war. What else? I mean. Robert Welch, our founder, used to say, what did he say? Education is our only tool.
Truth is our only weapon.
Truth is our only weapon.
That's right.
And it doesn't sound, you know, sexy in a way, you know, because it's not what we do. It's not gonna get immediate results, I would say. But there's no way out of this overnight, is there?
No, and here's the interesting thing about him. He knew that education was critically important because back then the communists or the insiders used education, and they use it with our children, and we see it today because what was it, 67% or some number in that fashion, most college students believe socialism is a lot better than the form of government we have today. Well, that didn't happen overnight. It took time. So our job is to re-educate people, but he knew education was critical, and books written about education. And that's a key strategy because that'll stay. So our job has been, we're really educators. We're re-educators, really. Changing the minds of people, forgetting who we are. And we mentioned our Congressman Scorecard. It highlights constitutionality, why it was unconstitutional. And we're teaching people our Constitution, the rule book, the playbook, the instruction manual for our country. And if you don't know that, you could do anything. So that's one of our biggest objections and goals, is to really teach people who we are.
And that really gets down to the bottom of it, doesn't it? What if we are able to help people learn how things are supposed to be, what the Constitution is, which our legislators are supposed to adhere to, that could turn the whole game around, right? Do you find that in your recruits and the people you run into, there's just a lot of people who don't know that, some of the actions they're advocating for, or the legislators they like, are unconstitutional? Is that? I imagine that's a big part of the job.
Absolutely. I had a friend that back, this is 2001, with what was it, the Patriot Act? Oh, he was all for it, and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, really? Because we were putting stuff out about that, and was very much against it. And I said, hey, look at this. Hey, look at this. And this is 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And, he got to thinking about it, and he was like, oh, well, now that you made that argument, that makes sense. But people get to watching the mainstream, and I'm going to call it propaganda, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And they get on board to these things and get diverted from what actually is going on and who the real enemy is.
Yeah, you mentioned CRT. We have an action item. We have an action project called Save Our Children from Public Schools. And that's another one of those that illustrates why what we do is different, in a sense, because we've been saying for a long time what these schools are doing. They are indoctrination camps, really is what they are. They're indoctrination centers, and they're a large reason why we have what we have, like you mentioned, the number of younger people who think socialism is okay. You obviously have to be indoctrinated to believe that, because all historical evidence is to the contrary. It has failed. It continues to fail. Where it's better, where it works better, it's only because there are free market aspects. But and then we talk about election integrity. I don't think we've brought that up, but that's another one of our agenda items. But going all the way to the bottom is what we want to teach is the Constitution, right? To help people learn so they can make the right decisions. So what do we recommend? What do you guys recommend to people listening and watching? What should they do? They're probably on fire. They're passionate. They see what's happening. They're convinced there is a sinister plan. It's so clear. What do you guys recommend? Wayne, you want to?
Sure. Join the John Birch Society is a good start. How's that? Okay. And then we have a magazine called the New American Magazine. Okay, which on that site has current articles about real news, not fake news. We have lots of videos, and then we have a school, the Freedom Project Academy, which is school. So, it's great to get your kids into a school, get them on the indoctrination centers or camps.
Look at Freedom Project Academy.
Yeah, exactly. You got to do that, and then the parents get involved in society because they want to preserve our country called freedom. So you can have your kids in school, but if you lose your country, who cares? But these are important tools to educate. Remember, I call it about re-education, because even the 40s and 50-year-olds have been dumbed down and indoctrinated.
Isn't that a term used by the tyrants, re-education?
Yeah, but re-educated for Americanism, but they forgot it because they don't know any better. And my experience is they have not read the Constitution. 4,000 words have not read the Constitution.
They
have no idea.
Pocket.
Yeah,
it's so small.
They have not read it. So knowing they don't understand the instruction manual, how easy it is to turn their eyes away from truth. So that's what we need to do. And we talked about those three functions. What do we need to do? Join the Birch Society, get active, and get educated. That's what I see. And people want to do something, right? Don't you guys see that as well?
Absolutely,
right? So maybe
absolutely. Well, going back to the scorecard, I think that, and I tell people this, it doesn't matter how your elected officials talk. They can talk really conservative, they can talk really liberal. How they vote, that is where the rubber meets the road. And also, one thing we failed to mention is each bill that they vote for or against has how much it costs a household. And most people don't know how much each is there. And when you see, this cost me $14,000, oh, this cost me $10,000, and it adds up to like $30,000 or $40,000 in 1 year, it's like, oh my goodness, what is this guy doing? I think getting a hold of that and getting our members and getting active with sharing this with other people, especially with the ones that want to go out and vote, and getting these people out of power that just want to destroy America, I think that's a good start.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a good way to start. Yeah. What do you got, Dave?
Constitution as a Solution is just a great series. I can't explain how many people that I've met who've seen that, and You know, from the very first part one, the difference between a democracy and a republic, most people don't know that. And they walk away just amazed that they don't know that. It's a basic principle. And then going into part two, the enumerated powers that you know, I explained to people. We live in a government, the only government ever in the history of the world that said, you know, starting with the Bill of Rights, Congress shall not, in the Second Amendment, Congress shall not, in the Third Amendment, Congress shall not, the Fourth Amendment, Congress shall not. You get the picture here? The government's not supposed to do very much. And the Constitution does not limit us, it limits Congress. It limits our government. And there was no document ever written in the world that limited a government. Only in the United States, because our founders knew that men inherently inside were somewhat evil, if not kept in check.
Right.
But that comes through clearly in part two, and then into part three we explained the importance of sound money, which we're seeing out of control right now with our government printing money, and so on and so on. It's a great series.
Whenever the Constitution as a solution comes up in these podcasts, and it comes up a lot, believe it or not, I always mention that it's how I was actually brought into the John Birch Society. A friend of mine who also happened to be my doctor in my own Montana town, he sent me a link to it. And I was like, it was like, I think it's like 6 lectures. And I was like, holy moly. Yeah. I was like, that is long. So what I did is I actually put it on my phone and I put my headphones on. And while I started doing yard work, I would listen to it. And I think by lecture 3, I was really into it. And it really triggered a lot of thoughts that made me question what I was your typical conservative, I would say. And in some ways, sometimes I'm still in danger of being very partisan in that sense. But when I heard that, it really rang true. And it really opened up my eyes, and it helped me see that that's the key. That's the key, to learn that Constitution. That is the gauge by which we hold these people responsible, but it's by the gauge by which we figure out what in the world we need to be looking for in the first place. And that's obviously been deteriorated. And that's why we focus so much on education. Obviously we want people to get involved in the JBS. So any last words, guys?
JBS is an educational organization, right? That's what we are.
All right.
And we're truth bearers, right? And so once people have a solid understanding of who we are and where we came from, and now they know the symptoms in front of us, they know we put them to action, what we can do to retrieve and save the republic. That's what they want to know. What can I do to make it happen? So education is an action item, by the way. It's not something other than that. It's an action. Education is an activity. And if you have a solid education, you won't veer. And we see that with the communists or socialists, is that they know they've ingrained socialism as the answer. So we have to re-educate them and say, no, that's a lie. And that's what we do. And I think people want to know. And they want to know who we are again.
That's right. In goals to 2030, they're going after the children, educate the children on all this sustainability.
We need to counter that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate you coming on.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. And we invite you to join us in this epic undertaking at this critical time in history. You can visit jbs.org to learn more about how you can help stop the conspiracy. Check out the links below for more on this. If you'd like to speak to someone, you can contact one of these coordinators. We have links in the description below to help with that. Whatever you do, let's turn that passion for freedom into lasting liberty. We really do believe that whatever ails society, freedom is the cure.